Okay, thank you. So I have one quick question. So homelessness is up 12% in the last year, and we've seen a net loss of affordable housing in the last 10 years. So my question to both of you is, do you actually think the status quo is working? And if this isn't the answer for Larry, then what is the answer?
I think that's a legitimate conversation to have. And that's why I said that this is an example of the cure being worse than the disease. I'm not defending the current system, okay? We know it's broken, okay? So let's try to fix it. This, like I said, is something that might kill the patient.
Well, I think the current system needs to be broken. It is broken, but it needs to be broken. When Reverend Alice Callahan, by the way, who has backed our measure, she's been working on Skid Row for about 35 years. I met her when she was also wrinkle-free. She talks about what has happened on Skid Row, and she cries about it because it's just a direct result. The city council says, yes, you can wipe out that building that has 100 or 200 people in it, and yes, the luxury can come in. Now, you brought up several times that this is going to trickle down, that the luxury housing will trickle down to the poor because you are creating more supply. Well, we've had, and this answers your question, we've had a more than 10-year building frenzy. There was a break in the middle because of the recession, but a massive building frenzy leading up to the recession, and now an even more incredible building frenzy, I believe the most incredible since perhaps the 1940s in LA. I don't remember the last one. And all it's done is drive prices up, which is interesting. So the supply has gone up of luxury housing. Now, why is this not trickling down? Well, the State Legislative Analyst Office, which is nonpartisan and very smart, put out a study saying, oh yeah, if you add a lot of housing, it will help the prices of housing. It will help. But here's the thing, they explain way into about halfway through. Luxury housing built today will eventually get older and be affordable in 25 years. So yeah, eventually this supply, slowly, it takes a generation for a luxury unit to become affordable to someone in the median area. It is never affordable to a poor person. That is not true. It doesn't do anything for the poor, the working class, and it takes a generation for it to trickle down to the middle class. They're making a power move here to bring in people from very, very expensive corporate people and foreign national people, jet-setter crowd, to come into these units, because it's interesting, there's a 12% jump in homelessness. There's a 12% vacancy rate in the luxury units in LA. That's a really high vacancy rate. A normal vacancy rate in a city is supposed to be around 5%. LA has a 2% vacancy rate, but empty units in the luxury because there's not enough people with bucks moving in. So they're not building for the people who live here. They don't give a damn about the people who live here. This is developers, everybody. The city council has lost its way. It's really sad to see. Years ago, we would have had a Joel Wax or some other outspoken person, Nate Holden, calling it for what it was. There's nobody like that right now. Very quiet over there. Lots of unanimous votes. We're saying force them to do their job. Stop right now. 2-year timeout. But permanent rules like no more EIRs written by the developer.
Okay, I have another question. With over 20,000 people in the city who are homeless, why are we not just building affordable housing? Why are we not just building project-based Section 8? Why are we building luxury units? It almost seems like reverse triage. In other words, if you're a heart attack patient, you go into the hospital emergency room, you're most likely to be helped. But it seems like here, we don't say to the person with the heart attack patient, let us take care of all these other people first and we'll get to you later. So why are poor people, why are people at 30% of the area median income and below not being prioritized? And how would this initiative help this? How would it hurt it?
This initiative would do nothing to help it. The reality is you can't solve the housing crisis simply by saying, well, you know, let's build more subsidized housing. I mean, it would be great if we had the funding to do that. You know, it costs about, I think it's like $250,000 or something to build an apartment, okay? So just think, okay, if we need 20,000 apartments, that's, I don't know, somebody else do the math. It's a lot of money, and in the world we live in, the funding isn't there. So you have to look to the market. You have to look to the free enterprise system, and that means increasing the supply. And you increase it across the board. So that, yes, you build high-end stuff, but you're also building middle stuff, and you're also, again, the high-end stuff, people move up into it, and it vacates the middle stuff, and it creates a larger pool of housing. But, you know, again, I noticed that the initiative proponents, they love to harp on, let's hate politicians, let's hate developers, they're all a bunch of crooks. There's a little bit of demagoguery in there, I think. And, you know, this is a room filled with people who spend their lives and their energies, like somebody, and I'm one of these people, working in the system, knowing that it's important to rock the boat, but not sink it. They want to sink the boat.
Well, I don't hate all politicians, and I only think about half of developers are crooks. I would like to say to your answer, first, do no harm. Right now, with the destruction of affordable housing, the small amount of affordable housing that is getting built because of the high cost, I think it's closer to $300,000 to build a unit, but what's happening is the affordable housing community, and with all due respect, because they're trying their hardest, they're spitting into a tsunami. The destruction underway, when I covered affordable housing for the Los Angeles Times in the 1990s, in the late 1980s, early 1990s, the entire movement was about preservation of old housing. They knew that LA was going to be, in fact it was, a boom town. It was amazing growth. And they knew the only way to keep people under roofs was to preserve affordable housing. You rarely hear about that anymore. You hear about tearing it down and putting up a luxury tower. So we're saying first, do no harm. The city doesn't have a plan. There is no plan. The developers are planning Los Angeles, and we can see around us what that's doing. It's not working, it's backfiring, it's caused the highest rents we've ever seen and the highest homelessness we've seen in probably since, I don't know since when, maybe the Depression.
Okay, I have one
Can I just say one thing about affordable housing? We just received the endorsement of SCAMP, Southern California Association of Nonprofit Housing. It's all the nonprofit housing developers in the city. Okay, in addition to people like Robin Hughes, who's a nonprofit housing developer from the boat communities. They have analyzed this initiative, and they say that it would probably negatively impact about 80% of the projects they build.
If I could respond to that, most affordable housing being built right now in Los Angeles doesn't need a zone change. It's built under the density bonus, and it doesn't need a zone change, and it will continue. The 2-year timeout has no effect whatsoever on them.
Not true, because ask them, do they not know what they're doing?
Well, I'm just saying that the vast majority of affordable housing built in LA does not require a zone change. Now, we're sorry that the affordable housing industry has become tied directly at the hip to the for-profit industry. It didn't used to be that way in LA. It's a shame, but they've been forced into it by various forces. I'm sorry that's happened. Our fight is not with them. We understand why they have to side with developers. It is obviously not building enough affordable housing in LA, the current system of relying on for-profit developers and their whims.
This is the technique. Impugn your opponent's integrity, okay? You don't have the facts. You can't make an argument based on data, so you impugn the integrity.
I don't believe I impugned anyone's
Excuse me. The
Didn't
nonprofit
impugn
housing
anyone's
developers,
integrity.
they don't know what they're talking about. Oh, probably because they're in bed with the the big developers. It's like you just dismiss their expertise and impugn their integrity.
Well, I don't think I
That's
did
the
that.
MO.
I think there have been many forces, including changes in laws, that have forced the affordable housing people to rely heavily on the for-profit developers. The for-profit developers are going to outspend us in a crazy way in November because they are making such huge profits. They do have enough money to build more affordable housing, but the greed level is just too huge, and they're not going to do it. They're not going to build more affordable housing.
Okay, and this is my final question. We're going to open it up to the audience. There was a USC study that showed that ridership on, particularly on subways and on public transit, was basically populated by people who make $24,000 and less. I don't know if you guys have seen the study. So how does luxury housing and these towers with people who most likely can't afford cars actually help increase ridership?
It's not going to increase ridership. They're shoving the working class further and further away from where the transit lines are, because when a transit-oriented zone is declared, the luxury housing and the luxury units go in, and the people who live there are shoved further away. So they're actually pushing their own customers further and further away from the transit lines, which is backwards. But LA is being planned by the developers. That's why backwards stuff is happening. There isn't a plan. That's why we're saying we have to have a general plan. We can't be living in 1996. We need to see how people are living now and create a plan for how people are living now, and not some dream about how we're going to live 50 years from now. I was told by the Metro spokesperson, and I think they might have said it in public, we're not building for you guys, we're building for 100 years from now. Well, that's not a good answer. We don't accept that answer.
That's a great answer, okay? And that's the problem. And that's the germination of a lot of this, folks backing this initiative. It's all about me. I got mine, okay? Now I'm pulling up the ladder and the hell with the rest of you. The fact is that we have an obligation to future generations. We have an obligation to our kids who are coming here and who are here and want to stay here. And yeah, we do have an obligation for the next 100 years. That's the whole point of what everyone in this room does every day in terms of their political activism. It's not just about me, it's about the future. And basically, talk about a 1996 plan, these guys want to go back to 1956.
So if the USC study says that ridership is primarily people who make $24,000 a year and below, how does the current transit-oriented development increase ridership if most of the apartments that are being put in on those corridors are for people who make more than $24,000
Well,
a year?
that's an issue that does need to be addressed, okay? But not this way. But definitely needs to be addressed. There's an organization called ACT LA. I don't know if any of you have heard of it. I forgot what it stands for. But it's basically was formed around this whole concept that there's not enough affordable housing being built in transit-oriented districts. And so they want to impact public policy. Now, the way they're going about doing it is lobbying and pushing on City Hall to get changes in, inclusionary zoning, et cetera, or inclusionary housing, which is you require developers to set aside a certain number of units for affordable. So, again, I get back to, it's about increasing the total supply, but yes, I am not defending the current structure, okay? It's flawed, okay? But like I said, okay, somebody's got, a scratch on their arm, you don't chop the arm off.
Okay, let's open this up to questions.
I just want to take issue on this mass transit thing, that it's only the poor people who ride it. I live in Sherman Oaks, and I use the Red Line all the time. And if there's a USC game, half the people on that train are going to the USC game. And the 7th Street Metro Station is so crowded with people going to the USC game that you can hardly stand there. And they are not the bottom 24%, let me tell you. So this is just kind of BS that it's only the poor people who live near the Red Line. A lot of people live near the Red Line because they work downtown and they commute down there. And so anybody in their right mind would take the train rather than ride downtown. So I saw that USC study, and I just don't see it when I ride the train. That may be true buses down in South Central and so forth, but it's definitely not true with the Red Line through Hollywood and up to North Hollywood, because I see it.
Any other questions? You guys want to respond to that, or?
Yeah, I remember back in '67 when, BART was being undertaken, and we had the same initiative here in Los Angeles, and it was killed. And so we went all those years without a subway until the federal government had to force us to provide mass transit, because all the people that didn't want to build a subway, that said it was going to wreck everything. And look at the Wilshire Corridor. That's a perfect example of this kind of thing. They really need that. That's one of the most heavy traffic areas, but everybody, all the NIMBYs along Wilshire didn't want it, so we had to go around an exposition and then maybe, come up with this after it. I live in Hollywood. We have a development there. I don't know if you guys are part of this La Mirada Avenue effort. There's a people called the La Mirada Avenue Association that have sued developers. One of them is at Western and Sunset. It's a Target store that was a wretched, horrible, dirty, empty lot and a broken down old shopping center for years. Finally, Target agreed to build a Target there, just like the one here in West Hollywood. It's almost the same model. And these people got an injunction against the developer when it was more than 50% built. Now that Target has sat there unfinished for over 2 years because of the people that said that it was too dense, it's too big for the neighborhood. The neighborhood needs that shopping center, and all of the other projects that are coming up, I get the mail all the time saying, don't let this development over here, it's going to ruin Hollywood. So I live in Hollywood, and I think there's a lot of people that actually welcome these projects. And I just want to know, how can you, how can you justify a blanket? Because I'm always suspicious of, I would be normally, maybe if I was 20 years younger or something, I would be saying, yeah, fight these developers. Sure. But it's like, I see it in a practical way, and I want to know, how can you justify stopping everything when this seems pretty drastic?
Well, we don't want to stop everything. In fact, only about 20% of what's being planned in the next 2 years will be affected in any way. I do know a little bit about the Target because I interviewed one of the attorneys for the Target project after it got stopped, because it was such a big controversy. And they told me that Eric Garcetti and other people in City Hall told them to go ahead and build bigger and ignore the zoning and don't worry about it. This is what Target told me. And we're going to let people do kind of whatever they want, and we want you to go. Target's plan was within the zoning. Their original plan was to follow the law.
But have you seen the neighborhood? It's a bad snake.
I have. I'm just saying that you might be blaming on the wrong people to attack the neighbors. The city council wanted more, and they told them to go around the rules, and they got sued for it. And that's what we call it, zoning lawlessness. It's being led by city council members who take money from developers and developers who make a fortune. Target's incredibly frustrated by this. They did not want to go outside the zoning. So that's just a crazy example. It's a great example from you, but it's a crazy example of how out of control the city council is right now.
Which guy
Yeah, I'd like to respond to that. Again, she keeps going back to the same thing. It's all about corrupt politicians, and it's all about developers, okay? Now, but the fact is, that's a great example. I drive past that Target all the time. That would have been a real addition to the community, okay? And people definitely wanted it. And it's really a shame that, it's sitting there, this hulking, concrete, empty thing, because the people brought a lawsuit and were able to stop it. But the fact is that growth and development mean jobs and economic development in a community, okay? It's not only politicians doing deals in back rooms. And if you reduce everything to that, then really what you're doing is you're saying to all the people in this room who are political activists who believe in the system that everything you're doing is a waste of time because the politicians are all crooked and they just, line their pockets. And that's an insult.
Well, I think the reason we're having such an interesting presidential election this year is because people do think that a lot of politicians are lining their pockets. So
vote for Trump.
I beg to differ. That's why you're seeing so much interest in Bernie, I think. Does anybody else have questions?
I wanted to ask specifically if you had an example of a danger where this proposition might, like as you said, coke, singing, and amber, what would specifically be stopped? What project or specific area might be hurt by that?
Well, there's a couple of, the one that I talked about, but I have a couple more also, is the gay center, the LGBT center, their project that they want to build. And I've talked to the project manager, okay, a guy named Stephen Byrne. And, I had a long conversation with him. That project will be killed by this initiative.
Hi. So a couple of things. I guess just one thing is my son makes more than $24,000 a year, and he rides Metro to work all the time. So just another aside. But I guess I don't understand how you expect that the city is going to create an entire new plan in less than 2 years. It's taken them like 5 years to do the transportation plan, and that still had to be sent back. So my concern is, how is this written? Is this 2 years whether the plan is done, or is it until the plan is done, which could be eons?
Under law, basically, you can only get a 2-year moratorium on such a fundamental thing. So 2 years is as much as we can get. I mean, beyond that, the courts would say that's not allowable. It would be challenged by the courts, excuse me. The point that we're following here is force the city council to start a really good start. Public hearings. Right now there's nothing on the calendar, and there never will be. They're never going to rewrite the 1996 because they feed off of not having a plan. So we're saying get rolling, get a very good start. We plan, and we're creating a citywide web of citizens. And I view it as very similar to when charter reform came through, if any of you remember that. The citizens had their own hearings, and then the insiders at City Hall had their own hearings. There was the Citizens Commission on Charter Reform, and then there was the City Council's own hearings. And they were dueling hearings. We plan to pursue the exact same idea. Real people. It was an exciting time because you could run from one part of town to the next and run into completely different people, all debating what do we want LA to become via our city charter, the city constitution. We envision this to be very similar. Force them to get started. The money's too good. They're not going to start it on their own. I'm not condemning them for it. All politicians need their money to get reelected. They're all doing it. Almost nobody isn't doing it. There's one member of the city council who will not take developer money, David Rue. Everyone else takes developer money. So that's a really good question. We're going to force a good start. We are going to watchdog it. We are going to have a citywide network of people who have never met each other before. It's going to be a really exciting time in Los Angeles.
You know, the interesting thing is that this initiative doesn't allocate a penny for this, what will have to be an expedited process. And even, you know, if they allocated the money to do it, I mean, let's face it, as many of you know, the public participation process takes time. There are statutory requirements. You got to have hearings. You got to allow people to read stuff and react to it, et cetera, et cetera. The concept of rewriting all 37 community plans in 2 years without any additional funding allocated is ludicrous.
If I could respond to that, I think if you took the money that the LA City Council spent and the mayor spent planning a completely pointless NFL stadium downtown that was never going to happen, and added that to the current mega bucks they're spending on a bid for the Olympics, both pet projects of the City Council, instead spend it on something much more important. What do we want Los Angeles to become? Here, City Planning Department, we're going to take all this money we've been spending on pet projects, we're going to spend it on what we were supposed to do a long time ago, which was right up there with fixing the 100-year-old pipes, which they are also never going to get around to. Do their basic job, take their eyes off of these sweetheart things they want to do so badly, these sexy ideas, and do the basic duty of their jobs. And that is not an extra expense.
So is it your organization's position to oppose the Olympic bid?
We don't have a position on that.
Well, you just said that
I think
it was a
it's
stupid idea.
another pet project of the City Council that costs a lot of money. There's a lot of money for planning when they want to plan something.
We have another question.
What would either of you say to the neighborhood groups, to the residents associations in the city who routinely oppose every affordable housing, veterans housing, transitional housing projects because it, in your words, destroys the character of their neighborhoods?
Well, it's very unfortunate. I really oppose that when it happens. It's not happening as much as you might think, because most affordable housing, I might have not been clear on this, most affordable housing, veterans housing, or other kinds of affordable housing is built within zoning. They don't need any hearings before the City Council. It's called by right. You can build it because it's allowed by the zoning. So there might be some ill will type neighbors who think this is wrong, but that gets to be built no matter what. That will continue on. We are not touching any of that. I totally agree with you. It's wrong, and it's unfortunate when it comes up. But it is a drop in the bucket compared to all the things that are being fought right now that are for the well-to-do. That's the big issue.
Well, you know, again, I keep going back to, you know, SCAMF, Southern California Association on Nonprofit Housing. They think this initiative is a bad idea. They ought to know.
I appreciate everyone allowing outsiders to come in and participate. To the gentleman, why should any developer or investor be allowed to ask for anything outside of the by right development? So if you see a piece of land somewhere and it's zoned for 4 stories, if you can't make money on it, don't buy it. Don't come back and say, I'm going to do a little fundraising, I'm going to lobby, I'm going to build like two low-cost housing, and now I want to build a 20-story unit. So why can't we take a little break from the developers manipulating the system? It doesn't stop anyone from building anything that's zoned the way it was. It just stops the rich and the powerful from manipulating the system. That's my first question. And the second one goes back to also the rich and the powerful in these transit zones that you speak of. Los Angeles is a car city. If we want to develop over the next 100 years our subway and bus system, which is a much more actually efficient way and cheaper than the subways, why not still demand that the developers include parking in their structures that are, whether it's a half mile or a mile away from a major transit point, also allows people to still have cars, so that there's more diversity. Because you mentioned solar, you mentioned carbon. One day we'll all have electric cars. So that's going to resolve the dirty part of cars. We're still going to want to have individual transportation. Why can people build 2 and 3 bedroom units with 1 or 2 parking spots? So a couple of questions. You can answer any one that you want. But I grew up here. I remember when the Design Center was a cement factory. and I played out there as a little kid. The city's grown a lot since then, and it's grown out of control. And it's frustrating to live here and watch the rich and the powerful take advantage of the system.
Well, I moved to Los Angeles 40 years ago, actually, 1975. And this, you're right, this is a very different city than it was when I moved to it. And you know something? It's a hell of a lot better. It's more diverse, it's more interesting, it's more creative. Yeah, there's more people. Okay, definitely there are more people. Yes, there's, you know, more crowds, etc., etc. This is a really exciting city. When I came here, I came from New York. I said, this is Long Island with palm trees, you know, and that's what it was in 1975. So, you know, it's changed. The city has changed, and we have to realize that the world has changed, and the city has changed, and people's needs have changed. Now, getting to the thing about, you know, why is it, you know, if it's zoned for 4 stories, that's the problem. The problem is that the plan, either the plan or the zoning, and, you know, that gets really technical, but the plan is out of date. It needs to be revised, because there are many instances where allowing 4 stories doesn't make sense. It's not enough.
Not only makes sense to the developer, it doesn't make sense to the community.
No, it can make sense to the community.
No input. The developer is the one with the power.
The community gets input because there's a public participation process,
Well,
okay?
we get to decide, as Joe said earlier, we get to decide things like stoplights. That's, we're looking at sunset right now.
I've seen a public participation process in this city that's quite robust. So, you know, maybe you're just staying home and you need to be in this presentation.
So we're going to
But
move
the
to
point
you.
is
You have a
that,
chance to answer, right?
you know, the point is that we need to update all these things. And the thing is that it's a value judgment. You're saying, well, I like LA to be the way it was in 1960. Well, that ain't gonna happen.
I like people to follow the rules.
All right.
Okay, so let's go on to closing remarks.
I'll just say a final thing about this particular debate here. The existing general plan, the one I'm telling you, the LA City Council is shirking its required role by law in updating. It had a horizon of 2010. That's where it was supposed to take us to 2010. And in it has enough zoning for 4.5 million people, because they were still overestimating radically how much LA was going to grow, even back then in 1996, and they still have crazy numbers on how fast we're going to grow. So there's amazing amounts of ability to build, and this gentleman wanted it both ways. He said there's no businesses are going to be allowed to be built, and housing is not going to be allowed to be built. And then he said earlier they're going to jam every area with 2-story housing, and it's just going to be terrible. Well, not both of those things can happen. It's going to, it's just 2 years, but the timeout allows for rational building for about 2 years. It doesn't wipe out every job. It doesn't do any of the things he's mentioned here tonight with a certain amount of exaggeration. But it does scare the city council. It scares the pants off the city council to point at them and say, you guys have been extremely bad. We're taking the wheel of this car, the citizens, for 2 years, and you are going to do your jobs.
Okay, Larry, final closing
Yeah,
remark.
you know, I just keep coming back to, I get the emotional appeal of the initiative's proponents. You know, it's fun to hate developers, and nobody likes sitting in traffic. But, you know, the reality is that 2 years, like they say, what is it, 2 months is a lifetime in politics. Well, 2 years is a long time to stop economic development, and that's what will happen. You will put the brakes and stop economic development in the city for 2 years. And, you know, LA, it's interesting. Yeah, we're better off than we were a few years ago, you know, in the depths of the recession. But we are probably one of the laggards nationally in terms of the metropolitan area bouncing back from the recession. In 2014, 60% of the new jobs created in the state of California were created in the San Francisco Bay Area, with 20% of the population. Okay? And New York City, ground zero for the financial collapse. they bounce back. So LA, has got a lot of problems, and it's lagging in economic development. This would just exacerbate that. So like I said, I'm not defending the system. It needs to be fixed. But again, the cure here is much worse than the disease.
Okay, great. Thank you both. This is a very raucous debate.
If anybody wants to read Hollywood's Urban Cleansing, and I bought 3 copies, please read it. It explains how they shove out low-income people. And really, it's important to read this. It's online, Hollywood's Urban Cleansing. You'll find it online.
Okay, so we at Stonewall, for our next step here, we need to wait for this initiative to qualify for the ballot, and then we'll bring it back to the membership for a vote.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone,
Thank you.
for coming tonight.